Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on serverless computing. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to the folks joining from different parts of the globe. My name is Noor Basha, a marketing lead at Winwire Technologies, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. So today's topic for this webinar is Azure Serverless with functions, logic apps, and event grid, where in the next 45 minutes, we will learn how to build apps faster with Azure Serverless. We'll also have some quick demos around Azure Functions, Logic Apps, and Event Grid. Before we start, let me highlight few housekeeping items. During the webinar, please feel free to post questions and we will try to answer them as many as we can at the end. We are recording this session and we'll share you the recording plus the presentation in the next 24 to 48 hours. So with that, let me take this opportunity to introduce you to today's session speaker, my colleague Viplav Sharma, who is the technical architect at Winwire Technologies. And Viplav brings over 13 years of experience in the IT services industry with expertise in architecting Azure-based web applications for our enterprise customers. Wipro is also a Microsoft partner technical specialist, where he helps Microsoft technical sales team as a part of the Microsoft Managed Partner Program. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Viplav to take the session forward from here. Viplav, over to you.
Thanks, Noor. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
All right. Hello, folks, and thank you very much for joining this webinar. And thanks, Noor, for the introduction. My name is Viplav Sharma, and as Noor said, I am a technical architect at Winwire Technologies. I'm a part of the team that's responsible for architecting the solutions that we build on Azure primarily. And in today's session, we will touch upon I would say, relatively latest topic, which is hot nowadays around serverless, and specifically around Azure Serverless, and three of the services that are very crucial if you want to build serverless architectures. With that, let's get started. Okay, so this is all we're going to cover in the next 30 to 45 minutes. We are going to see what is serverless computing, while some of you might already be aware of it, but we will take a brief look at what exactly is meant by serverless. And then we will go through these three services: Azure Functions, Logic Apps, Event Grid, and we will also see some corresponding demos that we have for you for each of them. Towards the end, we will open the house for any questions. You can feel free to ask the questions while the session is going on, and I'll trust my friend Noor to come up with those questions at the end, and I'll see if I can answer them. Okay, so well, we have all seen the cloud computing evolve over a period of last decade or so. Before the cloud providers were there, we always had our data in our own data centers, whether it was server rooms or big data centers, depending on how big the organization was. And then companies like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google came in with their cloud computing models. And for a while, we had three kinds of models for cloud computing: infrastructure as a service, where you could purchase the infrastructure from the provider and then maintain that infrastructure for your own applications. And this gave you quite a bit of control over the infrastructure, but without actually having the infrastructure on your premises. Then there were third-party companies which built solutions on cloud and sold them as software, which was nothing but software as a service. And we have tons of such SaaS solutions around the world. Uh, the one that has been very popular among solution providers is platform as a service, where you don't really bother about infrastructure, but you have the platform for you to build your applications on top of them. Over the last, I would say, couple of years, really, we have seen some more cloud computing models coming in, and one of them is containers. So containers, if we really see in terms of abstraction level, it's higher than infrastructure as a service, because not only the infrastructure is abstracted out, but you're also kind of abstracting the operating system. And container is nothing but your application with all its dependencies, so that it can run over any operating system or any machine as you want. Docker, DCOS are two of the most popular container providers. Excuse me. And what we are going to talk in this session is about another level of abstraction, which is serverless. Now, serverless is actually, even thinking about it, it's even higher in terms of abstraction than platform as a service, because not only you not worry about infrastructure, but then you're not even thinking about as an application as a whole. Instead, you are coding functions, and that's why it's called function as a service. You're focusing on your code and letting the cloud provider run it for you and scale it for you as per need. So we will take a deep dive. I won't say deep, but a slightly deeper dive into serverless and see what we can do with it. Okay, coming to the definition part of it. Basically, it's similar to platform as a service, because you're abstracting out the infrastructure and operating systems and servers, but there is a difference between the two. In platform as a service, you typically reserve your resources. So if you're having a web app, you will go ahead and say, I need this many VMs and this CPU and this RAM based on my service plan, and then here you're letting the cloud provider, which is in this case is Azure, to dynamically allocate the resources. And how it knows about the dynamic allocation is depending on what events are triggering it, what is the load, what is the whole need of the resources. And the best part of serverless computing is that you do not pay upfront. So just like you have in platform as a service, you will have a service plan, but here you are paying for what you are using. So if your function is lying there doing nothing, you're basically not paying much or not paying anything. Whereas you just pay for the time the function is running and for the number of resources it is using. So one of the things that comes to mind when we talk about serverless is there is no server. Well, that's not the case. You cannot run your program or code without any server. Servers are still there, but they are behind the scenes and being managed by your cloud provider, and you just don't care about it, or you don't have to care about it. That's why it's serverless computing. Azure has many of its services which allow you to build serverless applications. And as you can see there, some of them are here. For storage, you have Azure Storage, Cosmos DB. For messaging, you have Service Bus, Event Rate, which we are going to talk about. And you also have services around analytics and intelligence, like cognitive services and Azure Bot Service. So you don't in these services, you just have your application which will be running using these services, but then they're all serverless because you don't worry about the servers behind the scene. And the other two main services that we're going to talk about is functions and logic apps. They have been there for a while, and I'm sure most of you would already have either heard of it or maybe even used that. Event Grid is kind of relatively new, and we will also take a look at what it is. Okay, so functions. This is the coolest of all, right? And has been doing rounds in the market around, especially with the developers. So functions allow you to write functions, right? So functions are nothing but small pieces of code. It could be just 3 lines of code that you're executing, and the key thing is that you do not worry about the bigger picture or the whole application as such where this function is running. And obviously you don't care about the infrastructure. You let Azure, you trust Azure to scale the resources as per need. That's the key thing. You can achieve huge amount of scalability using functions. Whereas if you had an application where you had certain functions, you will have to scale the whole application as per need. In this case, you can just scale the code that you want to scale. So if you really think from a logical perspective, we have been talking about microservices doing certain piece of functionality. I would even say that functions are kind of nano services for you, where they are just doing one action, right? And you obviously do not create a whole application within a function. That's kind of abusing the whole thing, but that's pretty much it. And the reason why developers really love it, or whoever is trying to go for it will love it, is you can have your own choice of language. So there are I think 4 or 5 languages that you can use, and Azure is actually extending the list of languages as we move forward. So it's not just that it's a Microsoft function, so you'll have C# as a language. You also have Java, you have PHP, Node.js, and so on and so forth. And as most of the things are nowadays, functions is open source. The code is available in GitHub, so you can do your magic on top of that. Okay, so you might be wondering, like, okay, I wrote a 3-line code. What do I do with it, right? It has to reside in a bigger picture, which is your application or set of applications that you're building. And that's where the integrations come into play. So because functions can be integrated with many other services, which are not only Azure services, but also third-party services like GitHub and Twilio for messaging, right? And interestingly, you can also integrate with on-premises. So it gives you a variety of options for you to integrate with other services. So we will see in the next slide what I exactly mean by integrations. So let me actually go straight there. So this is what you would do if you have to develop a function, right? You could develop a function by 3 different ways. You could either go to the Azure portal. I will show you that in a few minutes. Or you can go to Visual Studio and code a function and deploy it to Azure, or you can use the Azure CLI for doing the same. So the key thing is there are 2 or 3 main things for a function, right? So one, you need to choose a trigger that will trigger the function. So that's where I was talking about integrations. As you can see, there are a few choices of triggers, whether it could be a timer, it could be a blob that is coming in storage, or there is a message coming in service bus. As soon as that happens, that trigger is executed, the function runs, right? The function is executed. Now, You obviously have to choose a language. As I said, there are at least 5 different languages you have, and the list is growing per day. And then once you code the function, you also have an option to include bindings. Bindings differ from triggers because using bindings, you can actually connect your code. From within the code, you can connect to various different types of services. You could potentially uh, send a message to notification hub from within the code, or send an email, things like that. So that's where your bindings come into picture, although they are not mandatory. So you can have input or output bindings. And then, yeah, you save it, test it. You can test it on the portal itself, and then you monitor at runtime. Okay, quickly, there are 2 ways you can host your functions. One is a true serverless model, which is this consumption plan. And in this, as the name suggests, you don't reserve the resources. Azure allocates it for you, and and it also scales up and down or out as per the load. So that's a typical function hosting for you. But you can also use the app service plan that you are used to using for your web apps and API apps, etc. But question is, why would you do that, right? That actually defeats the whole purpose. But you would do that if, let's say, you already have an app service plan and you haven't really utilized it, right? So you purchased an app service plan, but then for some reason or the other, you haven't really utilized it. So you may want to continue using it. There are a few other reasons, and these are very important when you are designing a function, because you specify the hosting plan at the start of the function creation. If your functions need to run continuously, right? So uh, as I said, functions typically run on trigger basis, and as soon as the function is triggered, the Azure fetches the resources for it and runs. So there could be cases when getting the resources may not be so quick. So if your function has to run like every second, then you may not want to go with the typical serverless way. Another thing is, your functions ideally should not be long running, like 10-minute long running, or they should not be very CPU intensive. For example, functions should be crisp, but if they are not, right, then you're rather better with app service plan, right? And then of course, if you're trying to run functions on Linux, which I think is still not there for consumption plan, then you want to go with app service plan. I'll show you in the demo how you can select these. Now, you must be wondering uh, how Azure just magically scales the whole thing for you, and how's it possible? So the crux of the story is that there is a component called scale controller. Without diving too much deep into it, what it does is it monitors all the events. Events are nothing but all your triggers. If there is any event that is happening, for example, there is a message coming in a service bus. What it does is it determines how much, how many instances of the functions are required, and it spins up those instances as per need. And once that action or task is done, it quickly determines that there is no more need, and it brings down the instances. So it's the scale controller that is the magician behind the whole magic. Okay, I'll very quickly go through this because we're slightly behind the schedule here. So use cases, right? The one of the best use case is order processing, where these commercial retail websites have typical events like Black Friday, when the load is going huge, and the next day there is no load. That's when you might want to have a function, let's say sending an auto reply to the person who is ordering, or it could be thresholding the alerts. It could be a stream analytics or IoT hub stream coming in, and you need to alert for any particular parameter that goes beyond a threshold, that's when you might need it. Or as I said, if it is not continuously running and it's a scheduled task like a DB backup, then you may want to use functions as well. And there are many other use cases, but some of them I have them on the screen. Okay, so I guess this is what we've been waiting for, demo, right? I hope the demo gods are with me, right? So I hope you can see my screen, and I'll just quickly show you what you would do when you're trying to create a new function. So new compute function app, and I'll just show this to you, but I already have a function created because I knew I talk a lot, so I may not have that much time. So basically you go here, give some name to your function. It's a very typical stuff, right? And then you specify the what do you call, the resource group, subscription, and here is that hosting plan, right? Notice when I say consumption plan, it is pretty fine with it because it knows what to do. But the moment you say app service plan, it will ask you what app service plan you want, right? So this is an important piece here. And then as simple as that. Now I'll not go beyond this step. I'll rather go to my own function because I've already done this, right? Let me go to my dashboard, and this is the function that I have written for this demo. So this is the Azure portal user interface, and there are lots of things you can explore here, but I'll focus on what you have. So FN serverless that I have here is a function app, and then in that app you can have multiple functions, right? So I've just created one of them, and what happens is, let me just show you. When you come here, if you say add a new function, right? So these are the options, the triggers that I was talking about, right? Service bus queue, blob trigger, and it gives you a very nice jazzy looking user interface. And it also gives you options like, okay, this one has these languages available, etc., etc. And then once you choose that, you pick. Now HTTP trigger has, even Python and TypeScript, right? And it also has PowerShell. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Once you come here, I have chosen a service bus queue trigger, and I'm writing it in C# because I'm comfortable in C#, and that's what I'm doing. So I have commented out this code because otherwise I had to put all the details. But what this function can do is send an email as every time there is a queue coming in, right? But for this demo, all I'm doing is executing the function and logging it, right? So how will this work, right? I have a service bus queue here, right? And right now this is my queue, and nothing here, right? So the thing is, as soon as there is a message coming in here, this function will pick it up, right, and do its job, right? So now how do I see that whether it ran or not, right? So this is the status, and if I go here, come on, right? So this is the monitoring part that I was talking about. You can come here and see when has the function ran. So last night I was trying out this demo, so that's why you see 13 hours ago there was a function had ran, right? And that's what it is. Now for the demo, I have also created a console application that is doing nothing but sending 10 messages, right? You can have more stuff here. Like here it is just integers, but you could actually send some structured message, and then here in the function you can retrieve that message, right? Because here you have a string coming in, you can parse it, and you can do whatever you want, right? So let's actually do it with, I don't want to talk more. So I'm running this application right now, Let's see if something else I can show. There are other options here, right? Integrate is where you specify the triggers, and as I said, you can have inputs and outputs. I haven't really used them in this demo. There you go. My application has sent these 10 messages, and obviously you won't see them in the service bus because they're gone, because hopefully my function has picked them up. Let me refresh it. And there you go, it doesn't work. Just a second, I think I need to enter. All right, let's see what went wrong here. You can trust me, it was working yesterday. Right. Let me see. Okay. Yeah, there you go. Right, it takes a little bit of time to reflect here, but as you can see, a minute ago, these messages from service bus queue were processed, and boom. Right now I'm doing nothing but just logging, but you could do anything there, right? And now this is 10 messages, right? Think about a scenario where you could have millions of messages coming in. So Mr. Scale Controller will understand that and scale up and down without you having to worry about it. So that's about functions. Now I have spent quite a bit of time on functions, and I hope you will spend some time to explore more. There are lots and lots of different things you can do. In the interest of time, I came up with this dummy, simple demo. Now let's talk about logic apps. If you're familiar with BizTalk, right, logic apps may make sense because essentially it's an Azure service, which is again a serverless service. It's kind of a tongue twister. Serverless service, which allows you to create workflows, right? And workflows that can integrate various systems within your organization, within Azure, outside Azure, or even outside organizations, right? So there's tons of connectors that are there. I think there are more than 200 connectors that you have, which you can use. And the cool thing about it is it's all visual, right? So of course you can code, right? There's a corresponding JSON to it, but if if you like it, you can actually go ahead and just drag and drop and that kind of things, and you can create visual workflows. Another interesting thing, it not only connects services and data within cloud, but also on premises or a hybrid connection as well, right? So could be a question, why would I go for logic apps if I have BizTalk? Well, both of them are pretty solid, but there are certain cases when you may want to go with BizTalk. And then of course, BizTalk has a license to it, and there's so many different things. Whereas logic apps, because it is serverless, you have to just pay for what you use. So there is enough documentation on Microsoft site that why you would go for logic apps. But the point is, in this session we will talk about logic apps. So as I said, there are many connectors. These are not the only ones, but on a high level, these are the 6 different types of connectors you can have. The built-in ones, HTTP, a request coming in, you might want to have a different kind of workflow for 200 and different workflows for status 400, 404, etc. You can also have functions that could be executed from within logic apps. That's very interesting. Then you have standard connectors. Well, Azure services like Blobs, Event Hubs, Service Bus, and also SaaS solutions like Salesforce and Twitter, and even like Office 365. That's a very popular one where you can actually send emails or anything like that from within the logic apps. As I said, you can also connect to on-premises. You can have a connection to SQL Server, BizTalk also, because you can have a cloud-based logic apps connecting to BizTalk, on-premises, SharePoint, and non-Microsoft stuff like Oracle DB, DB2, etc. Uh, Logic apps is a classic thing for any electronic data exchange, right? Like AS2, EDIFACT, XML, etc. It also allows you to connect to IBM, MQ, and SAP, which is really cool. And the best part, you can have your own custom connectors, right? So even after these 200 plus connectors, if you think that, hey, this is not enough for me, I want something customized, you can actually do that. And all you need to do is, have some RESTful endpoints, and there's a proper procedure on the website, how you can register your connector, how you can certify it, and use it as just like any other connector in your workflow. Okay, I am going to skip this or maybe talk very quickly and then show you the demo straight away. Again, you can create a Logic app on an Azure portal or Visual Studio. There are templates available. You may want to go with your own or custom template, blank template, right? And then there are triggers again, right? The difference here is like you could have a different kind of trigger, polling, which is polling for an event or pushing for it. And then there are different triggers like HTTP request, webhooks is another type of trigger, and then comes the main workflow part, right? So you can have ifs and else's conditions. You could have switch cases, loops. You can even scope your workflows, and also anybody who is familiar with workflow engines, you could batch and debatch, right? You can have a set of data coming in and process it by splitting it out for you to deal differently, right? So I'll show you a very small workflow that you can have, and that can always be built on top of that. So you save the Logic app, and then you run manually to see if it works, and then of course you monitor. Use cases, as I said, B2B is I think the classic use case for any workflow engine, right? And if you're having complex workflows, if your application is integrating with multiple SaaS solutions, I think this is definitely for you, right? And then if you are trying to handle messages in batches, definitely Logic Apps has that capability. And then this is one of the popular ones coming out nowadays, where people are doing sentiment analysis on the tweets, right? So based on the keywords or hashtags, if you want to take necessary actions or do something about it, that's where you would like that. And Logic Apps is also a good mechanism for logging and exception handling in your applications. All right, so we have around 12 minutes to go. So let me just switch back to my Azure portal, and there you go. I have a Logic Apps already created, but let me just show you how it will be for the first time. So you go to Enterprise Integration and Logic App, and very simple. I mean, you just let me just create it. Demo, delete me, and resource group, I'm going to use some of the, and then blah blah blah, everything is default. It's deploying. I wanted to show you that first screen that comes up, which may not come up in the one that I've already created. So okay, it's created. There you go. So as I said, Logic Apps, you can design the workflows visually, right? So here it comes and it says, start with a common trigger. These are the triggers you can have. By the way, event grid is also a trigger which we'll be talking about, right? So when a new files arrives, And these are the templates you can use. So some of them may be useful, right? Like for example, this one, send an email when an item in a SharePoint list is modified. I want an email, right? Those are things like that. There are a bunch of templates, but of course you can create your own. So let me quickly show you what I have to show you. Excuse me. So I'm going to this Logic Apps Designer. And I have 10 minutes. So very simple. And again, you don't get me wrong, you can create really complex complex logic apps workflows, but this is where we are, right? So when a file is created in my OneDrive, so I have actually given those settings, which OneDrive I'm talking about, I have logged in, and anything that comes at the root folder, right? Check for every 10 seconds. And you may not want to do this, but just for the demo sake, I'm doing 10 seconds. You have option to change it to whatever you want. And then condition, right? So this is your if condition, so to speak. If the file name contains review, right? Create a task for me in where? In my Outlook. So this is an Outlook task. Give a subject to it. You can actually have dates and all that stuff. But the key thing is that these options that you're getting are based on your trigger, right? So actually you can see I have used file name. I could have used any of these: entity tag, content type, is it a PowerPoint or things like that, right? So that's the cool thing about it. And then I'm saying, if not, then what you do is check if the document contains WinWire. That's my company. And if that is the case, send an email to me. You can actually, I think, attach the document as well, right? So this is a simple workflow which is telling that, hey, I want to review these documents immediately, put a task against me. Now, let me actually, do I have my OneDrive? So I am not completely ready. So I'm opening my OneDrive here. And sorry about that. Okay, so I'm going to test one of the conditions, which is creating of a task if the document name contains review, right? So I'm saying upload a file, and let me actually show my Outlook, not my emails, but my tasks, so that we can see there is nothing. Come on. Okay, so these are my to-do lists or tasks. There's nothing like that here. And I'm going to upload this review PPT, which is nothing but just a sample one. So I uploaded it. Now, if you go here to Logic Apps, how do I know if it worked, right? It would check in 10 seconds, so we might have to wait for a few seconds. And this is like last night, but let me refresh it. Come on. Okay, we might wait a little bit. I should have put it as like 1 second. Okay, why don't we just go to this PowerPoint and talk about Event Grid, because we just have 6 minutes left, and I'll come back to this demo. So Event Grid is the youngest of these three, right? So it is, I think it was released last year and still in preview. What it does is it is basically event-driven messaging mechanism, which allows you to build serverless architecture, so serverless applications. So it follows the reactive programming, which means it doesn't poll for events, but it reacts to events in a publish, subscribe model. And the best part of it is it allows you to, I mean, it allows massive scaling. And then again, it is serverless. It's like all dynamic. That's the cool thing about it. And just like others, you just pay for the operations that happen. So any message that is getting passed over, that is an operation, and you only pay for that. So this is a picture taken straight out of Microsoft documentation, and what it says is there are 3 or 4 key things, right? So you have event publishers on the left-hand side. These are the services where the event is happening, like a image coming into blob storage, and then topics are the endpoints where the publishers send the messages, right? So there could be variety of topics, different types of topics, right? So that's a kind of a categorization of events, and publishers send their events to topics. Uh, and then subscriptions define what topics the subscribers are looking for. So subscribers are nothing but handlers like logic apps and functions and all, and they would be processing the messages further, right? So in a nutshell, that's what happens in an event grid. But then there has to be security coming in as well, right? Anybody cannot be just publishing to the event grid and etc. So security is there both at the topic level as well as the subscription level. Another cool thing about event grid is filtering of messages. So you can have an Azure function listening in to a topic, which could be a topic could be of resource groups type, so any activity is happening in resource groups. But then you can specify that I only want this kind of activity, right? So there could be a filter, and there are various ways of doing it. So filters can allow you to do that. Use cases, just going by the previous slide, right? The subscribers could be, Azure subscription or resource groups. So it could be a large organization where administrators may want to monitor the activity in your Azure subscription. I don't want anybody to be adding virtual machines, for example, right? So Event Grid can kind of react to all those activities, and you can have a logic apps on the other side. It could be a workflow where somebody has to approve it, decline it, etc. A couple of use cases from Microsoft is streaming of big data to a data warehouse. You can go check it out on their website, and also resizing of the images. So any image processing that needs to be done once it is added to a blob, that is another one. So there are a few more, and I'm sure as this gets more and more popular, basically you'll have more use cases. Now, I want to cover this because there was this doubt in my mind as well. There's similar looking messaging services from Azure. So Service Bus, Event Hubs, and Event Grid. So what is difference? What is the difference there? So Service Bus is a very robust mechanism where if you have like a high risk, high value transactions happening and you want the security to be paramount, like for example, financial transactions, so you would really go for Service Bus. It allows asynchronous message delivery, and it has really advanced features like batching, filtering, and whatnot. Whereas Event Hubs is primarily used for big data, right? So any huge streams of events or data coming in, but it also differentiates between Event Grid and Event Hubs is that Event Hubs have the ability to capture the data, retain it, and replay it, whereas Event Grid does not really deliver data, right? So it's just sending messages and a very minimal data associated with it. So that's where the key difference lies. Also, Event Grid is reactive and serverless. So you can let the cloud provider or Azure in this case scale it as soon as you want. Last slide I'm here. I'm almost on time. May want to take a little bit on the completing that demo. So pros, we already heard. You heard from me like 10 times. I've been repeating the same thing. But there's always a disadvantage. So of course you lose control. You are your functions or any serverless service is actually being executed in a shared environment. So it is a multi-tenancy. So lack of control is there. You don't know what resources, when you will get it, right? And then security can be an issue, right? So you may not want high secure activity going on in functions. And then, as I said, if your functions are running for a long period of time, definitely not, right? And the one of the key things which I think there are workarounds, but there's a thing called cold start. So first time your function is executed, there is a little bit of lag by which you get the resources for your functions to get started, right? So that there are a few more. So you may want to not really get excited by serverless, then this is the real thing. I mean, we all are talking about that, but then you have to be careful, especially when you are designing applications for your critical customers. With that, I'm going to switch back to, and Noor, I'm going to take a little bit of more time. For some reason, that didn't execute. Hold on a second. Why was this uploaded? Yes, it was. This is interesting. So unfortunately, this didn't work, but again, it worked last time. So what is supposed to happen is this logic app thing should be creating a task for me here, and then that can be done accordingly. So something went wrong somewhere, and I don't want to be troubleshooting, especially when I'm 2 minutes over time. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. I wish I had double the time. I could have talked more and shown you more. Noor, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Viplav. Thanks for the wonderful session and taking us through the demo. Definitely interesting. I know we are over time, but I do have maybe a bunch of questions. But what I would still do is maybe take one or two questions and wrap it up. So one question, Viplav, is can we execute PowerShell commands from within the Azure functions?
I believe yes. And I think personally, I haven't done that. So I think, as I said, like most of the languages, if you keep checking Microsoft documentation periodically, you will see more and more languages coming in. But I don't know till what level PowerShell has matured from functions. But I think yes, I'm not 100% sure. I think we had that on the slide as well, but as I haven't done it myself, I cannot be vouching for it.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks. And one question is, can a logic app's workflow have multiple triggers?
Oh, yes. Actually, I should have said that before. That's one of the differences between functions and logic apps. Function always has one trigger, exactly one trigger, whereas logic apps can have multiple of them. So essentially, we are saying there are multiple entry points. That's why the workflow can get more and more complicated. I think there is a limit to the number of triggers. I'm not very sure on that, but yes, we can have multiple of them.
Perfect. Thanks, Viplav. I have few more questions, but I would like to take them offline in the interest of time. Again, thanks a lot, Viplav, for taking up this session. It's really informative, and I hope you audience found it very useful and informative. If you have any additional questions, please write it to us at marketing@finwire.com, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks again. Have a good day. Thanks, Viplav.
Thanks, Noor, and thanks, everybody. Have a good day.